Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Lonnie. Thanks to the Teagle Foundation. Thanks to all of you across the land for joining in. I can't see you, but I am hoping you can see and hear me. As you just heard, I'm a teacher, and I used to think I teach law. I now understand that I teach students, and I have to reach them the way you have to reach your students. And I've been invited to talk in particular about the Federalist Papers, and I've zeroed in on one in particular. Let me just zoom back just a bit and elaborate on what Andy already told you. I am trying to write actually a series of books, 3 in all, aimed at you and your students. These 3 books, when completed, I've finished 2 of them, and I'm working on the third, try to tell the story of America from its origins to the present moment. And in particular, the United States of America. So I'm not going to tell the deep prehistory of native peoples pre-European contact, or even in the first centuries of contact in the modern day United States between European and native peoples. Volume 1 of this 3-volume project is actually, I'm going to pull it out here, entitled "The Words That Made Us." And it's all about actually, well, I won't pull it out, how we become a we. It's a pun. The words that made us the United States, we the people of the United States. And it tells the story from 1760 to 1840, the first 80 years, the first 80 years, really, of what will become American identity if we focus on the United States of America. So in 1760, we're not a we, we're a group of disparate colonies connected to a common crown, but we're not talking to each other. We're people in Massachusetts and in New York and in Virginia, in the South Carolina. And if you look at newspapers, for example, of that period, they're not reprinting stories from other colonies. They are in conversation with the imperial hub center of London, the metropole. So that's 1760. By the end of volume 1, we will have become a we. Americans will have developed a legal identity, a bit of a cultural identity. They will have begun to come together in response to initially British neglect and then later British oppression. They will have started to meet together in person in the Stamp Act Congress in 1765, First Continental and Second Continental Congresses in 1774 and 75. They will have started to fight, and eventually they will have adopted a Declaration of Independence. They will have united as 13 mainland colonies, contiguous, united to try to win their independence militarily from Britain. They will eventually adopt an instrument of continental governance called the Articles of Confederation. They will then scrap that for a much tighter legal plan called the Constitution. They will elect national officials to operate that Constitution. They are led by George Washington. They will adopt a series of constitutional amendments, what we call the Bill of Rights, and a couple of others. Power will transfer from Washington to other revolutionaries, and eventually, at the end of this story, volume 1, The Words That Made Us, How We Become a We, the question will be whether they are going to be able to successfully carry the project into the next generation, because the founders will have died off by 1840. The book that many of you, I hope, were able to get, volume 2, Born Equal, tells the story from 1840 to 1920, the next 80 years, the next 80 years. And the big challenge in that period, as the title tries to capture, is to actually establish and redeem this very contested ideal that all men are created equal. And Lincoln's going to have certain ideas about that, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Frederick Douglass and Harriet Beecher Stowe and others. And that second volume, which you have, tells the story from 1840 to 1920, and the story in particular of 4 constitutional amendments that codify a birth equality idea, that everyone's born equally free, no one's born a slave, no one's born a slave master. If we're born in the United States, equal citizens, whether we're born black or white, male or female. And eventually, with the 15th and later 19th Amendments, we're born equal voters, whether we're born black or white, male or female. So that's the story of this volume, Born Equal. But for today, we're going to talk about something much earlier in that story. And then volume 3, by the way, we'll try to take the story from 1920 to the present moment. So I got to finish that. But when I finish, you and your students will have 3 volumes that try to tell a continuous story of American constitutionalism from the period before there was even a thing called the United States of America to the present moment. So that's the larger project. Now, within that, today we're going to zero in on the founding moment, the founding of the Constitution. The Declaration of Independence is in the rearview mirror, but we don't yet have a Constitution. We're going to focus on the ratification process of the Constitution, 1787 to 88. And within that, we're going to focus on one text in particular, a set of newspaper essays that are later bound into a book form that we today call the Federalist Papers or the Federalist, but there were a series of 84 or so, 85, depending on how you count. A couple of the essays get combined, but a series of newspaper essays from 1787 to 88, urging Americans to vote yes on this then pending Constitution in 1787 to 88. So we're going to focus in on the Federalist Papers, and within that, I've asked you to take a particular look at one of the 85 essays in particular, one that probably may be new to many of you, unless you've read all the Federalist Papers, and I'm sure some of you have. But I've asked you to read Federalist number 8 because I think it's particularly interesting and underappreciated. So let me just take a step back first and tell you a little bit about the Federalist Papers that I suspect you may have encountered. You may have actually read and even taught to your students the Federalist number 10. Or another one you may have taught is the Federalist number 51. Yet another one is 78. I'll say a little bit about those 3 in just a moment. So remember, the Federalist Papers are a series of newspaper op-eds. They're written behind a pseudonym, Publius. We know Publius was Alexander Hamilton, who coordinates the newspaper project from New York, along with James Madison from Virginia, with a little bit of an assist from John Jay, also in New York. It's mainly Hamilton and Madison because Jay becomes indisposed. He's not able to contribute as many essays as the others. So almost half are done by Hamilton, almost half are done by Madison. To repeat, these are a series of short newspaper op-eds. They come out 2 or 3 times a week over the course of several months. They first come out in New York newspapers. They are reprinted at different rates, some much more than others, elsewhere on the continent. And the main goal of these newspaper op-eds is to convince ordinary Americans to support the pending Constitution, to vote yes for convention delegates, specially elected in each of the 13 states. And these convention delegates, once they convene in each of the states, will in turn decide whether to vote the Constitution up or down, yes or no. And so the audience of the Federalist Papers are the voters generally in the 13 colonies turned states and eventually the convention delegates themselves who are going to have particular weight in this process because they're the ones that are going to decide whether formally New York ratifies, spoiler alert, it eventually does, or doesn't ratify, whether Virginia as such ratifies or doesn't ratify. Just to give you a sense of the size of these conventions, the New York convention basically is 58 people or so, and it eventually passes by a vote of 30 to 27. The presiding officer doesn't vote. Oh, so it's a very close run thing in New York. And to remind you, the Federalist Papers are a New York-based project. Now, why have you been taught the Federalists 10, 51, and 78? I'm guessing those are probably the ones that you've most been told to focus on. And 10 is the first essay written by Madison. The readers don't know that. They just are seeing Publius. But 10 is written by Madison. And many folks today think Madison is the key to things. I actually don't. And it's saying vote for the Constitution because the states are not governed particularly well. Majorities aren't really fair to minorities in some of the states, but if we can expand the project and have a continental government, the continental government will be more protective of liberty than state governments will, and it will actually be able to keep an eye on state governments. I'm ruthlessly compressing, but that's the basic argument of Federalist 10. And I'm going to tell you, no one paid any attention to that at the time. Almost no one. And for the next 100 years, almost no one. So it's a fair question. Well, if that's so, Professor, why are we teaching 10? And I'll tell you the deep background of that eventually. 51, another essay with James Madison, authored by James Madison, is all about checks and balances within the federal government, a separation of powers, a bicameral legislature, a separately elected president, and why that will be conduce to liberty, with ambition checking ambition, the legislature checking the executive, and within the legislature, the House checking the Senate, and vice versa. That's Federalist 10. Federalist 78 is all about the role of the judiciary, and in particular, it's written by Hamilton. They don't know that, we do. And it's all about the importance of judicial independence, and as part of that, judicial review, the power not just of the Supreme Court, but of every court to refuse to follow a law, even a duly enacted congressional law, that the judges in their independent judgment think is inconsistent with the Constitution. Those are probably the three Federalist Papers most taught today: 10 by Hamilton, 51 by Hamilton, 78 by 10 by Madison, 51 by Madison, and 78 by Hamilton. I've invited you to look at something completely different. Number 8. I think it is the key argument for union. It summarizes and synthesizes the arguments of Federalists 2 through 7. And so I'll just begin by saying, if you had a great argument for why people should vote yes on the Constitution, would you wait till your 10th op-ed to make it? Of course you wouldn't. This early argument of Publius is the one that clinches the deal, and it's a very different argument from Federalist number 10. It's Hamilton's argument, it's Washington's argument, it's Ben Franklin's argument. It's the main argument for the Constitution, and your students probably don't know it. Maybe even you don't know it unless you've read the Federalist Papers start to finish with great care. It's short, so that's why it's a great teaching device for your students, because you can teach this text. It'll take them 10 minutes to read, tops. And if you wanted to give them a little bit more, I would give them Federalist numbers 4 through 6. So that's maybe another hour's worth of reading at most. That's someone reading really slowly and really carefully. What, in essence, is the argument of 8 as compared to 10? And the argument of 8 is the argument that everyone is talking about elsewhere in America. It's the idea that that basically persuades ordinary farmers to vote yes. They pay no attention to 10, to repeat, and Americans for the next 100 years pay no attention to the Federalist 10. We can prove these things with word searches today. That it's just not in discourse. And I'll tell you later why actually you're teaching 10, and it's because of actually a Columbia professor, not Andy, but a predecessor of his, a man named Charles Beard, who rediscovers 10, makes it front and center, and all your teachers and all your textbooks, actually, whether they are aware of it or not, are disciples of Federalist 10. The left loves it for reasons connected to people like Howard Zinn. The right loves it for other reasons. And so you're all teaching 10, and it's not where it's at. Where it's at is 8. Here's the argument for why you should vote for the Constitution. In 3 words, and I'm going to do a share screen now. I hope this works. Share screen, and I'm going to put up Ben Franklin's very famous political cartoon. He initiates it. Ben Franklin's a genius. Franklin stove, lightning rod, bifocals, all sorts of stuff. This is the world's first political cartoon. It's called Join or Die. Hope you've seen it. And that's that's in 1754. So way before the American Revolution, before the Constitution, before the Declaration and the Constitution. But Franklin is understanding America is a unit, and it has to actually work as a unit. This is the world's first viral meme, in effect. Hashtag join or die. You can't cut the snake up, it will be dead, but if the snake holds together, it actually can bite. It will be strong. And at the left of this, let's see if I can make it even a little bit bigger. We've got South Carolina. This is like a map. It's in the west, and then North Carolina, it's SC, NC, V is Virginia, M is Massachusetts, P is Pennsylvania, that's also including Delaware, and J, New Jersey, New York, and NE is New England. It's west to east. It's like a map, and the idea is Americans have to actually be as one. Back then in 1754, Franklin was saying we have to fight together on the British side against the French in what's going to be the French and Indian War. This gets picked up on in many of the other colonies because it's a viral meme. It's easy to reproduce, and it's 3 letters. Hashtag join or die. He's writing for a democratic culture. This is appearing in newspapers, like the Federalist Papers. Will later appear in newspapers.
If I could interject for just a second, I think that the image that you're describing, it's not visible right now on the screen.
Oh, hold on. So let's just do share screen. Share. So now when I do a share screen and I pull up my screen, Lonnie, you're not seeing join or die?
No, I am not. But it
Okay.
worked when we did our little tech check.
Yeah, it did. If not, we can, let's do this. Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Now okay, because I'm an idiot. That's why. Okay. I'm a sterling
No, you're not.
professor, and okay. So now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lonnie. Okay, so you see, I'm making it a little bit bigger here and close off this tab. So you can see we got South Carolina on the western side, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland is M, Pennsylvania is P, New Jersey, New York, New England, join or die. Okay, we've got to actually hang together, initially against the French. And now, this gets reproduced in all sorts of other newspapers in the 1750s. This one's, in New York and then up in Boston. Okay, join or die, join or die. Franklin's a genius. He's a genius, a democratic genius, because in 3 words, he's telling everyone on the continent, we are one thing. We are one continent. We've got to hang together. This gets this viral meme sort of goes into hibernation, but with the Stamp Act crisis, it reawakens in the 1760s, and now it's against Britain. And the fanged end, the eastern end of the snake, is very, just coincidentally, but now it's actually the fangs are facing Britain because Britain isn't treating America very well, and then it revives yet again in the 1770s, right on the eve of the American Revolution. So this is an amazing meme in American history. It's Franklin's join or die. We have to hang together, or we will assuredly hang separately. That's Franklin's idea. That, my friends, is the big idea of the Federalist number 8. It's Washington's idea, it's Hamilton's idea, it's Franklin's idea. In a nutshell, here's the thought. You look around the world in 1786. Who's free in the entire world? Because not the Russians, not the Chinese, not the Indians, not anyone in Africa, not anyone in Central Europe, even France. They helped us in the war, but they're an absolutist tyranny. Basically, in the world, who's free and governs themselves? The Brits, to a fair amount, even though they've got a hereditary monarch that no one voted for, a hereditary House of Lords that no one voted for, but they do have elections. They do have some democratic participation. They do have some juries. So you got the Brits and you got the Swiss in the Alps. Why are they free and is no one else free? And the answer is because they have defensible borders. Because Britain is an island, and the Swiss have a natural rampart, the Alps. If you have a naturally defensible borders, you won't need a big army because you won't have thugs on your borders with huge armies that you have to defend against. But if you're not an island nation, if you've got borders to defend, the other side's going to have an army. You're going to need an army. It's going to have a bigger one. You're going to need a bigger one. The armies are going to be used by people, by leaders, strongmen to suppress people domestically. And that's today in the world. You see Ukraine faces Russia, for example. And in their era, France is always fighting Germany and vice versa. We want to be like Britain. We want to be an island nation. But in order to do that, we have to join or die. When Scotland and England were separate kingdoms, the Scots were whomping on the English and the English were whomping back. And Mel Gibson was coming down. That's the movie Braveheart. And Mary Queen of Scots is getting involved. And no one is free because you're living in an armed camp. If, however, a la Franklin, we Americans can join, then we won't die. If we can create a unified landmass, we can rely on this massive moat, not a 30-mile wide English Channel, but a 3,000-mile wide Atlantic Ocean. We won't need a big army. We'll need just a small enough force structure, infantry structure to push the Canadians back and eventually and keep the French from expanding, and the Spanish and the Brits, and to actually push back native tribes on our terms when we want to do it. I'm not defending the project, I'm explaining it. This will become Manifest Destiny and the Monroe Doctrine. If we can actually unite, join, then we will need a very small army, and a small army will not threaten domestic liberty. You won't have presidents sending people into Portland or Chicago. They're not yet part of America yet, but you get the point. Into Boston, okay? Because armed troops were sent into Boston in the 1760s and 1770s. At one point in Boston, 1 out of every 2 or 3 adult males wore a red coat. And that didn't end well, the Boston Massacre and all the rest. We can avoid all of that. We won't need a big army if we can join like Scotland and England joined. They formed a perfect union. That's actually the language of the British Act of Union in 1706, 1707. We want to do what they did 80 years earlier. We want to unite. We want to form a perfect union with no land borders between us. The snake has to be unified. This is the argument of the Federalist 8, and no one will mess with us because, in effect, we'll be an island nation. And we won't need a big army to repel thugs on our border. That's what people voted for when they voted for the Constitution. It's the argument of the Federalist 8, building on the Federalist 4 to 6. That's their big argument. That's what they lead with. That's what persuades people. I've shown you some images because I think images are great in the classroom. Images from Franklin. This is Franklin's argument. This is Washington's argument because he's a general. He understands this stuff. This is Hamilton's argument because he fights at Valley Forge and other places. He understands this stuff. It is very different than the argument of Federalist 10, which you've been teaching for various reasons. Maybe we can get into that in the Q&A, but I hope I've just begun to sketch out for you why, one, you should read the Federalist 8 yourself. Two, I think you should teach it to your students because it's short. Three, I think you can accompany it with some visuals, join or die. And it's going to be much more explanatory of later American history, volume 2, because, and here's, I think, a good, a place for me to transition to some of your questions. This whole project requires the North and the South to join together. And truthfully, they don't have that much in common. The North is very moralistic. It's very opposed to slavery. It's already begun to get rid of slavery in much of the continent. Beginning in 1776, there is an abolitionist project to end slavery in the North. Pennsylvania ends slavery, beginning with a constitution that opens with the following words: all men are born equally free and independent. It's a constitution written in large part under Franklin's supervision. And in Massachusetts, under John Adams's watchful eye, Massachusetts adopts a constitution in 1780 saying all men are born free and equal, and that will immediately end slavery in Massachusetts. And slavery is going to end in New Hampshire and modern day Vermont, which becomes a state, very quickly, and Rhode Island and Connecticut, and not long thereafter, New York and New Jersey. The North is moving away from slavery. The South, especially the Deep South, is doubling down on slavery. South Carolina, it's a bad marriage. They agreed to unite indivisibly because the snake can't be divided. They agreed to unite because otherwise they're dead, but they didn't have that much in common, and that's going to end not so well with the Civil War as the South becomes increasingly pro the Deep South, increasingly committed to slavery, and the North becomes increasingly opposed to it. That's the story told in Born Equal, but you won't understand that story unless you understand America begins not as one thing, but 13 different things. They unite for geostrategic, military, geographic reasons. They have very different visions of the world. There were compromises made about slavery, 3/5, but they had to join. I'll say it one more way because I mentioned indivisibility. This is all implicit in the Federalist 8. That once you're in, you're in. Because if South Carolina can be in today and then leave tomorrow unilaterally, if it's really sovereign, which it says, but it's not, the Constitution doesn't say anything like that, but if it could leave today, or in 1861 for that matter, or in 1789 for that matter, 1790, if it can leave today, because it's sovereign, the next day it can make a treaty with Putin today or any European thug way back when. And the day after that, you will have European soldiers, Russian soldiers, in the Carolinas, which is not where you want them. You want them halfway across the world. Ask any Ukrainian. That's the argument of Federalist 8. And that's why I'm making this pitch that should be part of the canon. We can talk about why instead you're signing, perhaps if you're signing something, Federalist 10, 51, and 78, which is not actually why people voted for the Constitution. So maybe now, Lonnie and Andy, we can begin to transition to a conversation and questions.
Thank you, Akhil. You make a very provocative argument, and I noted at the very end you alluded to your conviction that the Constitution guarantees the perpetuity of the Union, which is an interesting and probably somewhat contentious discussion that one could have at another time. But I wanted, while people are thinking I mean, you've given us a lot to think about, and while people are gathering their thoughts, at the beginning of your remarks, and I really appreciated that you said this, you said you've come to believe you're not a teacher of law, but you're a teacher of students. And that's very resonant, I think, for everybody on this call, because in a way, that's a definition of teaching general education, where you step out of your discipline. You're not there to prepare students to become a major of this or a major of that, but you're there to engage with students with what's on their minds. And I was thinking as you talk, and as you called our attention to Federalist 8, which I went back to read before the meeting, and I'm paraphrasing now because I don't have the text in front of us. Uh, at one point, Hamilton says, it's inevitable that if people feel insecure, if they feel threatened, sooner or later they will choose safety over freedom. And that really jumped out at me as a sentence that resonates with the present moment. What I'm getting at, and sorry for this long preamble, I suspect students have on their minds what's going on right now. And that comment, that when people feel threatened, attacked, invaded, insecure, they start to allow things to happen that threaten their freedom. So your point in Federalist 8 says, listen, watch out. If we don't hang together, we're going to see standing armies in the streets, in the states, which is exactly what we fought the revolution to get away from.
Right.
And we're seeing that, we hope, in a small scale and not, viral way right now.
Yes.
So my long-winded question is, how much of contemporary political concerns, the daily headlines, do you allow into your classroom when you teach a text like this? How quickly do you allow students to say, well, they were talking about how things are right now?
It's what's on their mind. It's every day for me is a teachable moment. Um, I could probably teach any class, any year, just out of the front pages of the major newspapers. Back when we had newspapers. I mean, now I'm talking about, online screens. So, I tell my students things like the following. Why are Americans so free in general? Okay. And they're saying something like separation of powers, Federalist 51. I say, no, because actually Britain doesn't have a separated system and the Brits are relatively free. But that they don't, their PM, Prime Minister, is an MP, a member of Parliament. They don't have a separated power system. They don't have a federal system. They're relatively free. Okay. And they say, oh, well, it's because, we have a written constitution. I say, well, Britain doesn't have a written constitution and they're relatively free. They say, oh, because we love freedom. I say, I promise you, my parents, when they were born, loved freedom too, but they were under a British thumb. No. The reason you are free, because of judicial review, because they think it's from 78. Also not true. The judges don't actually enforce the Constitution very vigorously for much of American history. John Adams signs a law that makes it a crime to criticize Donald Trump. I mean, John Adams, okay? And he does use that against his political enemies, against his sitting, the party led by his sitting vice president. So the reason Americans are free is not judicial review. It's not a written constitution. It's not separation of powers. It's not legislative bicameralism. The reason America is free, white Americans, for most of our experience is our geography, which enables the following key fact. There is no major standing army in peacetime for the first 150 years. So presidents can't easily use an army to suppress critics. That's why you're free. And now, my fellow Americans, my students, thank you for asking that question. You can see why the last 75 years are so much more dangerous, because now your generation has, and it's not your fault, it's just how history happens, the world's largest and most dangerous military, industrial, and carceral complex imaginable. You've got they created a really strong presidency for George Washington for geostrategic reasons. Hamilton is his right hand. It's not Madison's Constitution. I argue, in the words that made us, it's Washington's, it's Federalist 8, it's geostrategic. We created a strong presidency, and now he has the world's largest military at his disposal. And you should worry about that because we didn't actually have a huge army under George Washington because we didn't need one because the moat worked. But the moat doesn't work today in the same way because we've got intercontinental missiles, we've got nuclear submarines right off our coasts. You also won't understand, my, fellow liberals. I happen to be a Democrat. What why Trump won and won again unless you understand the significance of borders. Federalist number 10 doesn't tell you about borders at all. Neither does 51, neither does 78. 8 is all about borders. It's all about maps and lines. And so is the earlier set of Federalist Papers, 4 to 6, leading up to it. So you won't understand your world, I tell my students, on some of these things unless you understand the Federalist 8. You won't understand the particular anxiety, the deep roots of anxiety about sending troops into Portland, or into Chicago, or into Memphis for that matter, or New Orleans, unless you go back to British troops in Boston in the 1760s and 1770s. And the Federalist 8 is all about armies as opposed to navies. Read your Constitution, my fellow Americans, my students. It says that the Army has to be reauthorized every 2 years, but not the Navy. They're much more worried about armies than navies because navies can only pound a coastline, but they can't come, inland and threaten your family, your wife, your children in the hinterlands. An army can do that. An army, when it comes in, this is what armies do. It will rape. It will pillage. It will plunder. And not just even the enemy army. Your own army may do that. And you're going to need a huge army if you have a huge land border with a big military power right alongside you. My students, look around the world and just, even though we've got a huge army, look at how different your situation is than the Ukrainians, than the Israelis or the Gazans, for that matter. The rest of the world has often, much of it, land border with thuggish regimes. Your life is so different than the life of someone in Poland. Because they actually have to worry about Belarus right on their flank and behind Belarus, Mother Russia herself. France and Germany, in maybe not in my lifetime, but in the previous century, fight 4 wars against each other: the Napoleonic Wars, the Franco-Prussian War, World War I, World War II. You need to understand where you came from, how even in World War II, 30 million Russians die, 20 or 30. France falls, Berlin is reduced to rubble, Dresden is firebombed, bombs rain over Britain, and here it's only Pearl Harbor, which is half a world away. That's all because of the Federalist number 8. The Federalist 8 will help you understand your world in ways I think that the Federalist 10 not so much, or 51 or 78. So I do try to pick stuff from the headlines and also from history that they may remember. Oh yeah, there was World War II. Oh yeah, there was Pearl Harbor. Oh yes, Ukraine is happening right now, or the conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah.
So yes, I do, and that is a way to reach students, talking about stuff in the headlines.
Yeah.
Why is he talking about borders? Okay, because borders are actually important to the American constitutional experience.
No, this is great. And I just one quick comment, and then we'll go to Q&A from the participants. I mean, we have a situation right now where the President of the United States seems quite open to the idea of deploying the Army to maintain domestic tranquility, he would say. You're describing a constitutional tradition focused on Federalist 8 that says that's not okay.
That's dangerous.
It's dangerous. It's not okay. And I would only make the observation that for many of the people on this call, we have to walk carefully because more students than we might expect, and I think some of us who teach in fancy Northeastern institutions sometimes fail to recognize this. There are going to be a lot of students who are supportive of the way American politics have moved in the last 8 to 10 years and supportive of the current president. And their views need to be respected and not dismissed. So it's an important discussion when you have this tension, but it has to be done delicately and respectfully, as I'm sure you agree, of our students. So but what you're bringing to us is a text that kind of puts that issue front and center for all of us who teach anything about America one way or the other. And I just want to make that observation. I'm talking too much, so Lonnie, I would
Andy,
yeah.
you're absolutely right. So in the words that made us, for example, I'm going to show you pictures of, um, for example, because I want to equip you with resources to understand, later developments in American history. So I'm going to show you pictures of George Washington on his horse, leading actually a federal initiative against the Whiskey Rebellion. That's George Washington, okay?
Right.
And
Right.
that's because this is what happens when you actually, refuse to comply with legitimate federal policies. Today, that might be ICE. Back then, that was a whiskey tax. In volume 2, I'm going to tell you stories about Abe Lincoln using federal force in the Civil War. At the end of this book, I'm going to tell you all about Andy Jackson using federal force. So in American history, sometimes the locals have been, the heroes. Sometimes the central government. Sometimes the army has been, very much the enemy. Redcoats. Sometimes it's been the heroes. So I'm going to equip you as a student with the examples from American history so that you can begin, whether you're liberal or conservative, to understand your world. I'm going to really emphasize the conservatives. I'm saying we liberals, not me, but many others, don't understand borders. We don't understand the significance of borders. And I promise you, Federalist 8 isn't just about why militaries are dangerous, but why also, borders are hugely important to the constitutional project.
Oh, that's great. That's very, very helpful. Thank you. We've got some questions and I want to make sure there's time for them. Lonnie, do you want to share them with
Yeah.
us?
Yeah, so let me, there are some really wonderful questions in the Q&A. So let me start with one question um, from a faculty member actually at West Point. Since, right, we've been talking about um, sort of civil military relations. Federalist number 8 is in one of their core courses. And the question before you, we teach this text as a reflection on civil military relations as much as an argument for union. We call attention in particular to the observation towards the end. In states with land powers as opposed to islands, the continual necessity for the soldier's services enhances the importance of the soldier and proportionably degrades the condition of the citizen. The military state becomes elevated above the civil. Can you comment, please, on Federalist 8 as an argument about civil military relations and how it relates to founding era understandings of civil military relations more broadly?
Yeah, this is deep. We could talk about naval powers versus land powers. We could talk about Athens, which is a naval power, versus Sparta, which is a land power. We could talk about Britain, which is a naval power, versus first France, or then Germany, or today Russia, which is a land power. So at a place like West Point, you very much want to talk about armies and navies and land power and naval powers, and that's connected to civil versus military. It's connected to militias, in which the civil component dominates, versus armies, in which the military component dominates. Armies are professional soldiers. They're trained in the use of arms. They're military. The militia is seen as the citizenry in arms. They're part-time, they're local, they're amateurs, and it's very much I analogize to the difference between juries, which are kind of civilian, and judges who are juries are amateurs and judges are professionals. Militias are amateurs and armies are professional. And this is connected to civilian authority versus military authority. Now, of course, many of our greatest presidents have been military figures, from George Washington to Ulysses Grant to Dwight Eisenhower, all two-term presidents who very much were impressive military folks, but who embodied ultimately civilian supremacy because they didn't use armed force to keep themselves in power. On the contrary, they had shown that they could be trusted with, huge power over the military and weren't going to make themselves dictators. That's why people trusted Washington. Grant wins the Civil War, but doesn't try to prop himself in power in a third term or anything like that. Ditto for Dwight Eisenhower, to pick three of our greatest military civilian commanders-in-chief, ex-military civilian commanders-in-chief.
Thank you. So, the argument that you are advancing about the importance of geography, I think this is something that for many of us, for a variety of reasons, I mean, I definitely feel like I'm being educated right now. And so, there are questions I'm seeing in the Q&A about how you introduce this argument related to geography to your students. I mean, is it part of the overview you offer about Federalist paper number 8? Is it something that just develops as you dive into your discussion or into the writing assignments? What do you find you sort of like, or is it in the context of the course objectives? And then relatedly, do you assign any writing that gets students responding in a extended way about the text? What are the types of prompts that you use? And as part of that, something that's been on my mind, your point about your reminder to us that these were op-ed pieces, right? I mean, they're advancing an argument, but they're meant to persuade. They're also meant to catch your attention, right? I mean, there were lively pieces of writing. So do you draw students' attention to the rhetorical devices that the writers were using? I'm just thinking, for example, this is a text that, it can be used in government courses or political science courses. But if you're teaching in a general education course that's meant to strengthen students' writing skills or public speaking skills, what are ways in which this text could be an example for students to study as a piece of rhetoric?
So lots of questions there. So one thing I like about Federalist 8 is it's very short. So we can get into individual sentences and take a look at it in rhetorical structure, teach people how to read carefully and therefore how to think carefully and eventually write carefully. So I love all of that. I try to use visuals. I just showed you, for example, some political cartoons. Those were visuals, Franklin's cartoons. But since I am very interested in geography, I love maps. I think maps are a good teaching device. I just put up on the screen, Lonnie, while you were talking, a map that is in the Born Equal book. There are actually 8 pages of color maps in the middle of the book. And I just invite my fellow teachers, even if you haven't read the book, just spend 20 minutes, 10 minutes even, looking at those 8 pages and the captions. They're a whole book within a book with all sorts of amazing things that you can see in the maps. And to look at the maps and then look at the captions. These are 8 pages worth of maps. I'm going to tell you about one of them in particular, but I'm just scrolling so you can see. These are my 8 pages of color maps. And in the new book, Born Equal, I love the color maps, but I'm going to show you a couple in particular that build on the themes that we've been talking about. So I first made a geostrategic argument. You want to actually be far away from Europe, and you can see with something like that we have much of the continent to ourselves. Now we have Canadians to our north, but it's thinly populated, and they're not going to be much of a threat to us. We have Mexico to our south, and in this book I talk about the Mexican-American War and how all that unfolded. But at the founding, the big idea is we want a huge moat between us and London, Paris, Berlin, Moscow. Okay. But then after Thomas Jefferson gets Louisiana from France, now we have both sides of the Mississippi River. And this is going to be very key for someone like Lincoln in the next generation. He's a join or die guy too. Federalist 8 foreshadows Lincoln and Lincoln's unionism. And these maps show that you can't cut the Mississippi River in two, because everything has to come up from New Orleans into the heartland. And if you want to get your corn or grain out to the world, you're going to have to go down the Mississippi River. You can't cut this river system in two. So I show people on the top, here are the borders, and on the bottom, here's how this connects to geography. I was talking 8 about coastlines. Now, for Lincoln, it's going to be about rivers. It's going to be about water basins, drainage basins. This is a map about drainage basins, and everything drains through the Mississippi. But I'm also going to show you maps. Here's the problem with all of that. The problem is, maybe I can show it to you in this one. So America, the rivers unite us. Oh, but slavery divides us, because red is free soil and green is slave soil. So the rivers connect us, the oceans protect us, but slavery is going to divide us. And now you're seeing with images the big themes of American history. And even today, North and South don't always see eye politically. So you asked so my answer is, since I'm taking a short text, I can read it to you paragraph by paragraph and show you the rhetorical devices and all the rest, and get you thinking about how to write, how to read, how to think. But I like visuals like maps and pieces of art, because join or die is going to show you all sorts of things. It actually is a map. It's left to right, west to east. But I'm also going to show you actual maps, because geography is interesting and you can learn a lot by looking at historical maps. And the new book has great color maps.
Thank you. Okay, last question. So there have been a number of comments in the Q&A about how, strategies you use to teach number 8 with other Federalist papers. So for example, one comment, this has been great, and I'm convinced that Federalist number 8 needs to be taught first. But I wonder if you are overselling the unity between the states. Isn't Federalist 51 and maybe similarly Federalist 10 important as clarification for the kind of unity we can expect from the Union? So I'm taking from this question and others like it, how you are putting Federalist number 8 in conversation with other Federalist papers, how you handle that for your students.
Well, the key question is how you get people to vote yes. The Federalist Papers are not just a treatise on government. They're a political intervention with a very immediate goal: vote yes. So here's my first point. Which comes first? 8, 10, 51, or 78? And the answer is 8. You say, well, why isn't Federalist number 1? Because I'm saying, actually, I beg you, read 2 through 6. Or even 7. 8 simply summarizes the argument of the entire first section of the Federalist Papers. 10 does nothing of the sort. 51 does nothing of the sort. 78 does nothing of the sort. So yeah, maybe I'm overselling it, or maybe I actually, after 40 years of studying the thing and reading it and rereading it and rereading it, I'm on to something pretty big. First, you got to get people to understand that their choice is join or die. And either we come together or we're dead. That's the first set of Federalist Papers. Then I start going into the details about how when we come together, listen, we've built in some safeguards. There's a bicameral legislature. Oh, this is mentioned in the Federalist number 9 about balances within government and all the rest. But I'm going to go into details about how we have 2 houses of the legislature and 3 branches of the federal government and judicial independence and judicial review. But I can't get you to even pay attention to anything. If you're a farmer, as I first say, listen, unless we come together, we won't be free. Only in the world, look around the world, it's only Britain and the Swiss. And why? Because they have defensible borders. We have to have that. Without that, we won't even have a chance. Then with union, which is the Federalist number 8, geostrategic union, we're going to have to make sure that we protect liberty in all sorts of other ways. And that's going to be the later Federalist Papers. Yeah, I'm not saying don't read those, but 8 sets the table.
This has been really a great brain exercise, and we could go on for much longer, but I know you have to go, and we want to give our participants a chance to ask any sort of process questions about our Cornerstone Initiative. But I just want to make one last observation. I mean, before we open the Zoom room, as it were, I think you said something like, this is a newspaper op-ed. And I would just throw in this suggestion, I think is implicit in what you're saying, that for our students to read this, which is, a little bit challenging linguistically, but not
Yes.
too bad. It could take a few minutes to read it, maybe read it twice, and to remind them that they're reading a newspaper op-ed
Yes.
that was designed to convince people to vote a certain way on a really important issue, and to think about, what analogies we have in our own time. As you point out, we don't newspapers don't mean much to most of our students anymore. So what does that say about how our culture has evolved, that we can have this kind of a sophisticated political, geopolitical argument in the local paper and on which the fate of the Union depended? That's just something to wrap your mind around,
Yes,
right?
and the genius before that of Franklin in 3 words,
Yeah,
join or die, and a really simple picture, like the snake is dead if you chop it up. Okay, like
right.
wow, that's democratic. Because yes, these aren't. Hamilton is a genius, and so is Franklin, but they're geniuses in a democratic culture in which they have to explain stuff to ordinary people in a way that they can get pretty quickly.
Yeah, and Franklin, in many ways, seems closer to our contemporary discourse, right? If he could boil it down to 3 words, that's a really good tweet. Um, Thanks very much, Professor Amar, and we really appreciate it. I think you run the risk of our inviting you back sometime. And
Thank you.
thank you all for participating.